There has been great controversy over a recent measure passed by the United States House of Representatives, H.R. 6090, also known as, in plain language, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2023, introduced by Congressman Michael Lawler of New York. Now, a lot of people, in talking about this act, have criticized it for being a hate speech bill, and they've also criticized it for potentially criminalizing the practice of Christianity in the eyes of some people. Now, when I came into making this video, before I had truly dug deep into this topic, I myself thought all of these things were the precise criticism as well. But as I read the bill and I kept reading the context around the bill, I figured something out. A lot of people who are critiquing this bill are not critiquing it in the right way, and they are instead using unrelated fears that I think are reasonable to have in general, but are not reasonable to have in the context of this bill to make their political argumentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in the video, about how sometimes the politics of hysteria can actually blind us intellectually to being able to approach something with goodwill and with rationality, and can conjure problems that don't actually exist and make us more scared than we ought to be. When you operate with fear, you cannot operate in power or with reason. And if we're going to actually restore this country and protect this country from all enemies, domestic enemies, foreign enemies, I don't care what enemy, we must walk in power, we must walk in reason. Now, the bill itself actually only has one section. There's several sections. Only has one section that has any statutory force. The first section is the title. The second section is the sense of Congress, which basically in bills is when Congress just lays out their opinions about something. It's not anything to do with statutory enforcement. You can't enforce those. The second section is findings. The fourth section is definitions. The fifth section is the rule of construction, which basically simply sets the context of which this bill will be enforced. And that is actually how the law will be made. So the Section 5, the rule of construction, which is actually what gives the Department of Education power along these fronts, says the following. In reviewing, investigating, or deciding whether there has been a violation of a title of the Civil Rights Act 1964 on the basis of race, color, or national origin, based on an individual's actual or perceived shared Jewish ancestry or Jewish ethnic characteristics, the Department of Education shall take into consideration the definition of anti-Semitism as part of the department's assessment of whether the practice was motivated by anti-Semitic intent. Now, many people are raising the question, well, what is anti-Semitism? Well, the definition of anti-Semitism used in this bill controversially comes from an organization called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and the New York Times defines the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's treatment of anti-Semitism as, for example, considering claims such as denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination and claiming that Israel's existence is a racist endeavor as being anti-Semitic. And many people, including Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and other folks, say that this bill criminalizes the New Testament on the basis of that definition. Now, I'll say this much. The IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism is absolutely 100%, in my opinion, unreasonable. It is more in line with the philosophy and methodology that goes ahead and gives credence to the idea of hate speech, which is a philosophically unsound concept. And most importantly, it is not by any metrics objective. It is influenced by personal and political biases. Now, with that being said, I have a problem when people accept the premise that they are given without actually investigating the issue as itself. What this bill actually does is it commands the Department of Education to direct and manage funds in accordance to the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism. This only applies to public universities and private universities who receive federal funds. Now, for those of you who are astute, you already know the critique I'm going to make. I'm not going to make the critique that this criminalizes the Bible, because this only impacts college campuses. This only impacts universities. The argument can be made, well, Christian, this may go beyond that. And by the way, it may, but the critique of this bill cannot rest on some possible future that exists out there. It must rest on the concrete, tangible reality that is in front of you. The real question we should be asking is, why are federal funds going to universities in the first place? The follow-up question to that we should be asking is, how does federal influence pervert and taint education within America? The third question we should be asking is, how in the world did this idea of education become conflated with government management of educational institutions? These questions are not sexy, they're not attractive, they don't bring outrage, but they should. Because the entire context of this bill is that there are protests happening in schools that some people object to and that many people deem as anti-Semitic. Now, by the way, I've been an outspoken critic of the pro-Palestine protest. I've been an outspoken critic of the sort of Islamo-leftism that has creeped into American life and has perverted many people's sentiments towards certain issues in the world. I've been an outspoken critic of many anti-Semitic people. I have been a supporter of the Jewish people, and I will continue to be a supporter of the Jewish people. And so this is not about my personal opinion on the matter in terms of Israel or whatever. This is about the condition and status of American education and why this bill shouldn't have even been a possibility in the first place, not because they're trying to criminalize Christianity, but because it rests on a false notion that has brought hell to American education. Going all the way back to the days of the Great Society, Lyndon Baines Johnson said that his vision of the Great Society was to enrich the community with education, with the arts, and with so many other things. And from this came more federal funding for certain kinds of education. From this came the invention of PBS, Public Broadcasting System, and NPR, which was essentially created as a federally funded, grant-funded from federal government institution to enrich the culture, enrich the public. Whenever those in power say, we want to enrich you, what they actually mean is they want to influence how you think, and they want to control you. Because the norms of power don't know enrichment. As the philosopher Richard Price pointed out, the norms of power seek to preserve themselves. Those in power are not actually worried about what is moral, what is true, what is ethical. They're worried about what will get them elected, what will allow them to keep hold of power. So when you have a government-managed cultural program which is there to enforce certain things upon the culture, you have to therefore, by necessity, try to control the culture. How do you control the culture? You control the culture by A, controlling what people see, and B, controlling what people think, and then creating an Overton window of acceptability around what people see and what people think. This has been a project happening on the highest levels of power for decades now, and it is emblematic in the condition of the American university. Think about this for a moment. American universities have been receiving funding from the federal government for a very, very long time, whether it be in the form of grants or research grants or direct student loan funding or what have you. And if the goal of that was to enrich the culture, enrich the community, if we look at the state of modern American education, can we truly say that the goal of federally funding universities and colleges has actually enriched very much of anything? Perhaps on some very small scales it has. Perhaps it has most certainly enriched the career prospects of some STEM students who are working on microbiology or who are working on the structure of a pylon. Perhaps it has enriched that. Perhaps it has indeed enriched the lives and the pockets of sociology professors who seek to have an outlet by which to spew their epistemologically unsound doctrine. Perhaps it has enriched that. But has it enriched American society truly? Any objective observer looking at how America is ranked in terms of educational attainment in the world, and also looking at the condition of many American universities in terms of the concepts they teach, whether it be DEI, whether it be false revisionist history that America was founded in 1619, whether it be that whiteness and white people are bad, whether it be that colonialism is the state of all nations in the world and violence is justified for colonialism, whether it be that power politics and power analysis is the only way of seeing the world, whether it be that our entire entire reality is socially constructed, whether it be, I don't care what it is, all of these ideas come and are facilitated by the university system, and many of these ideas live loudly in the mouths of many young people in Gen Z who on surveys purport to believe in these ideas. It shapes their perception of the world, gives them a false perception of the world, and therefore makes them commit unwise and false actions. That is the product of the American university system by and large. I don't care if there are exceptions. I don't care if there is a good doctor that learned how to be a good doctor at the university. Great for them. When you think of the cultural impacts, the culture is being impacted more by people enslaved by false and epistemologically unsound ideas than it is being impacted by having good doctors. Which, by the way, good doctors are encapsulated within a system of the pharmaceutical companies which rely on the ignorance of the American people to be able to do what they do, including with the government, to make prices high and to reduce competition. If we had a culture that was morally educated, do you think that the big pharmaceutical companies would have been able to get away with enforcing a socialist version of healthcare upon Americans in the form of Obamacare? Oh, you didn't know that they wrote that? You didn't know that the companies literally sat down in Congress and wrote the so-called Affordable Care Act? Come on, people. Come on. This is not about your fears. This is not about you being persecuted for being a Christian. This is about the deterioration of American education and the federal government's active role in destroying American education. And yet everyone I hear is not even talking about this. Why in the world are federal funds going to education in the first damn place? Let me go all the way back to the 1850s. Some of the very first universities that we now know to be prominent and good and rigorous, right? In the society of status, they are just good. Johns Hopkins, University of Michigan. In the case of University of Michigan, its first president went over to Germany, which was Prussia in those days, and he learned from a guy called Wilhelm von Humboldt. Wilhelm von Humboldt was a Prussian bureaucrat who had very specific ideas about how he believed education was supposed to be. And he had a principle called Wissenschaft. And to him, Wissenschaft meant education for the sake of education. And he believed that education should not take place for the intellectual and moral advancement of the pupil, but rather education should take place for the advancement of both the discipline, the subject, and also the advancement of the government. In fact, when he was before his king, I can't say the word, Caesar or whatever, but when he was before his king, he said, the state and education must be separate so that education can work as a proper vanguard for the state and so it can advance your goals, O king. And that idea was modeled in front of most American educators. John Dewey modeled this idea. The entire founding faculty of Johns Hopkins University, the top university in terms of medical stuff in America, which is also, by the way, facilitating gender transition of children. Did you know that? They all were educated over in Prussia. And this model of Wissenschaft gave credence to the idea of federally funding education, because education, when this Prussian idea was introduced, was no longer about helping the child, it was about helping the system and furthering the discipline, and that meant that education was now a community affair, not an individual affair, and therefore we need to create an entire category of public education which directly arose from the Prussian-influenced progressive era reformers who wrote into law funding for education and centralized education. And the modern day university system is a product of this long march through American life and this reinvention of American education. And so this bill wouldn't exist if we had a decentralized system of education that had no ties and no funding from the federal government. But we don't have that because we are in a Prussian-influenced system. I hear no other conservative or right-leaning commentator talking about this. People, if you want to actually get solutions for these issues, you need to stop blaming boogeymen. Stop blaming Israel. Stop blaming whatever boogeyman you've invented in your mind. And blame the fact that your politicians are under the spell of anti-American ideas in terms of how they view our society and how they view education. And this bill is simply one example in hundreds of years of examples, hundreds of examples of why their views on education are destructive. No Child Left Behind was another example. Common Core was another example. And yet, you guys don't even want to talk about that. It's all about, foreign influence. Give me a fucking break. And I'm sorry to curse, but give me a break. We are in a position in our country right now where there is so much going against us, foreign and domestically. And fine, let's have a conversation about foreign influence in politics. I don't mind that. But what I do mind is when the actual issue is ignored to fight a straw man. I mind that very much. I reject the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, so to speak. Primarily because I understand that the bill is not about anti-Semitism. The bill is about continuing to influence American education to the tune of those who don't actually care about anti-Semitism. They don't actually care about protecting Jewish people. They care about maintaining hold over their power. We should all oppose anti-Semitism. We should all, in our own personal lives, oppose it. In our own societies, oppose it. But you're not going to do that by furthering the Prussian system, which has allowed universities to become dens for the kind of behavior and ideologies, like whether it be anti-Semitism, whether it be DEI or social justice, or whether it be racism against people. Universities have been facilitating this conduct for so long under the guise of virtue. You don't actually beat the ills by continuing to fuel the sickness. That's why I oppose this bill. That's why I'm against this bill. And I think that every American who really believes in the principles of our country should have the same mentality. Separate this from your thoughts on Israel, for your thoughts on anything else, and recognize this for what it is. A continued attempt to centralize education and direct education to the likings of bureaucrats, to the likings of communitarians, against the intellectual advancement of the pupil. We don't need new laws to fight abusive behavior from racist and anti-Semites or anyone else on college campuses. We already have those rules in place. We need to enforce them. We do need new laws to undo the damage that has been done to American education, that has produced this current climate of hatred of all kind of people, this oppressor-oppressed dynamic. We need laws against that, and those laws will always involve radically transforming our system by, number one, abolishing the student loan programs. Number two, withdrawing all federal participation and all federal grant sharing and all federal funding for all universities, public or private. And number three, working together as Americans, putting our brains together to work on a decentralized, pupil-based, principles-based idea of education, as opposed to this centralized mess that has deteriorated the American mind so much so that now we're seeing college campuses not as places of education and learning, but places where activism is incubated by the agents of that system, which then seek to sick those activists upon the world to, as my favorite commentator, William F. Buckley said, immanentize the eschaton, bring heaven upon earth in the worst way. Reject it, understand it, study it, reject it, and focus on the real issues. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can. If you want to help me get my message out there and help me sweat some more on camera, you can donate to me if you want to. If you want to hear more philosophical commentary on these issues, you can also feel free to comment and all that kind of stuff. Study history, my friends. Study philosophy. Read the those you're criticizing. Understand the issues. And please, stay pensive.